Hi guys, my name is Mukwe Odemakin. I'm a PhD student at Istanbul University, Turkey. The presentation you're about to watch is about eco squares. In the presentation, I analyze ecologically inclined squares, that's squares that are designed with ecology in mind or designed to protect the ecosystem. In the squares, I worked with a main case study, which is the Taksim square, and I analyzed four other squares: the Isfahan square, the KARTAL CEVIZ square, the SULTAN AHMET square, and the Shanghai People's Square, which are examples of eco squares. In the presentation, I also propose strategies that can be implemented in Taksim Square to make it more ecological, that's make it an eco square, because among all the analyzed case studies in the presentation, Taksim Square is the only square that is not an eco square among them. So I hope you enjoy the presentation and learn a lot from it also. Please let me know about your thoughts in the comment section. If you have any questions also, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you very much and enjoy the presentation. Okay guys, the subject of my presentation is Taksim Square in comparison to eco squares. The main keywords guiding this study are eco squares, sustainable urban squares, ecological urbanism, ecological public spaces, and iconic buildings. Iconic buildings are a definition of a city, report about its history, the ambition, or how it wants to be seen. Often they have a story. For instance, when a city is mentioned, an imaginary image immediately associated with the city comes to mind. Popular examples are the Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building in New York, the London Bridge, that's the London Tower Bridge. No matter how diverse modern cities may seem, they always contain community centers that are recognizable locally and perhaps nationally and globally. If we look at the slides down, those are iconic buildings in different parts of the world. These buildings are buildings that when they are seen, they immediately give a picture of where this building is from. They are examples of iconic buildings. Okay, these are examples of some iconic structures around the world. The Eiffel Tower, which is a very popular tower in Paris, the London Bridge in London, and the Empire State Building in New York. Public squares and parks hold the same significance, not just buildings and structures that are seen as iconic. Sometimes in some cities, the iconic identity of those cities are not just buildings or squares. In some cases, they are not just buildings or structures. Sorry, in some cases they are squares. For example, the Taksim Square in Istanbul, Turkey. It's an iconic location. Another very iconic location is the Central Park in New York. Recently, the increase in environmental problems across the globe requires and has resulted in profound approaches and strategies in order to support natural resources and result in a sustainable ecosystem. The center of these strategies are ecology. In designing, in architecture, in building, recently there has been the need for the world to go in the way of ecology, because the ozone layer is depleting, there are environmental problems that keep increasing, and population also mounts up the problem. So in order to control these issues, buildings need to be designed ecologically, even public spaces. These are some environmental problems that tells us that we need to start designing buildings with ecology in mind. For instance, water pollution, growing industries in different parts of the world, both developed and developing countries, has led to pollution of water, pollution of air, and it calls for urgent attention when it comes to designing buildings and designing public spaces. Water pollution, ozone layer depletion, the deforestation rate, it's alarming in many countries, global warming, natural resources depletion, overpopulation, waste disposal, and air pollution. Incorporating ecological considerations into design has become an important action to save the planet. The lifespan expectancies of ecological resources concerning efficiency has raised the level of cognizance, and cooperation towards sustainability. The concept of sustaining the ecosystem encircles various human actions, researches, plans, and awareness in which three major interrelated factors of society, economy, and environment are considered. When it comes to ecological designs, there are three main important aspects: the society, the economy, and the environment. This study highlights Taksim Square in comparison to Eco Squares. As I said earlier, I'll be comparing Taksim Square to some Eco Squares around the world. Taksim Square. Taksim Square, which is the most known modern city in Istanbul, it's a very iconic location, iconic square in Turkey as a whole, not just in Istanbul. It was designed in the 40s by a French urban developer Henri Proust. Standing at the beginning of the Istiqbal pedestrian street is the Independence Monument. On the south facade is the statue of Atatürk, İsmet İnönü, and Fevzi Çakmak in the front, and other figures behind them, including two Russian generals. This is just like a brief description of the physical state of Taksim Square. On the north facade, the War of Independence is symbolized. There are monuments there are historic monuments present in Taksim Square. The Turkish army is symbolized with a soldier holding the Turkish flag on the east and west facades. Across this monument on the other side of the square, there is a huge building, which is the Atatürk Cultural Center. And also, we prepared a SWOT analysis for all the cases that are analyzed in this study. The first SWOT analysis we'll be looking at is the SWOT analysis of the Taksim Square. The main strength of this Taksim Square is that it is a main transportation hub and a popular destination for both tourists and residents in Istanbul. As a lot of people would know, Turkey and Istanbul, it's a well-known tourist destination point. And when a lot of foreigners come to Istanbul, one place that is always on their bucket list is to visit Taksim Square. So that's one of the main strengths of the square. One week on Among the weaknesses of the square is that the square is surrounded by buildings that are not designed as green buildings, are not designed according to edible criteria. That means that the available landscape or available plants and trees are not plants that you can eat from, like fruit trees and the rest. And the energy consumed in night lighting is not obtained from a renewable energy source, which is an important criteria for eco buildings or eco squares. And also, a larger portion of the square is covered in concrete, like we can see from the picture. It seems the only landscape in the square is just the circular part where the monuments are gathered. Generally, the entire square is almost entirely covered by concrete. In cases like this, when there is rainfall, there is total runoff. The soil around the square doesn't absorb the water. One main opportunity of this square is that the square was planned at a central point, which allows users to meet many needs by consuming less energy. The square is positioned at a very strategic position. There are lots of activities around the square. You can go around the square with performing different activities over a long period of time. That's a very good opportunity of the square. And among the threats, the lack of shading elements reduces use in hot summer and rainy days. Because there are very few shading elements when there are harsh weather conditions, it doesn't encourage people to stay longer. And lack of seating elements discourages prolonged stay. Lack of adequate vegetation cover increases surface runoff. And automobile activities in and around the square increases the risk of air and noise pollution, and also risks safety for in this case, it's not very safe for children to be alone in this location, because vehicular transport is not limited in and around the square. Okay, now let's look at eco villages and squares. In this section, we'll be looking at what are eco villages and what criteria are used to define eco villages and eco squares. Eco villages are basically designed communities intending to be socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable. The depicting attributes of an eco village or sustainable community comprises of human scale, healthy and sustainable improvement, full feature settlements, and the harmless incorporation of human activities into the natural world. In other words, an eco village or an eco community should be human scale. It should be something, it should be a location where people can easily interact with each other. It should be a healthy environment. It should be a sustainable environment. It's an environment that can sustain itself in every aspect, both energy wise and in every aspect. It should be a full featured settlement, a settlement that has every basic thing that the inhabitants of that settlement would need. And it should have harmless incorporation of human activities into the natural world. What this means is that human activity should not impact the ecosystem negatively. This is an example of an eco-village. It's called the eco-village at Ithaca. It's a perfect example of an eco-village. From the picture, we can see the green areas are much. There's a lot of pedestrian access, and automobile access is restricted in this Ithaca village. And one other important factor is that the energy sources here is completely renewable energy. As you can see on the roofs, there are solar panels. Criteria we saw is according to Robert Girish. Now, according to another person, Musa Shakeri, he described what an eco village or an eco square should look like based on a table, and he analyzed it based on an existing eco park. In his own opinion, the end point of an eco village or an eco square should be sustainable development. That is the main objective. Between both man and nature, the main objective should be sustainable development, satisfying human needs and recreation in the environment, compatibility with all conditions, protecting the environment and environmental development. Any eco village or eco square that its one of its main objective is not protecting the environment, it doesn't meet the criteria for being the basic criteria for an eco square or an eco village. The first criteria is energy efficiency. For both an eco village and eco square, the energy sources should be renewable energy sources, and there should be energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, renewable energy sources, waste management. The waste should not just be disposed recklessly. If possible, the waste should be recycled. Water management, water recycling, biodiversity is a very important feature of an eco square or an eco village. The ability for different forms of the ecosystem to coexist in a particular space, that makes the very successful location or a very successful eco village or eco square. Mobility and transport, the limitation of automobile usage in a space or in an eco village makes it more eco-friendly. The aim of this is because automobiles emit carbon dioxide, and not this is not good for humans, which are the main users of eco spaces. So the use of pedestrian accesses or bicycles is a very good means of transportation in an eco village. And also the land use in eco villages are very important. They should be uniform. It should not be completely concrete covered, or just buildings, or just a farmland. That's why it's an eco village and or an eco square. It should incorporate every aspect of the ecosystem. And also, air pollution prevention is also another important criteria for an eco village. Noise pollution prevention. In the aspect of noise pollution prevention, we are talking of the type of materials used, the activities that happen in and around the site. For instance, for an eco square, the flooring material should not be noisy materials that distract people when someone is walking on. And an example of this is using woody materials for the flooring of an eco square. It results in noise pollution. Another important criteria is environmental management system, the body or the set of organizations that manages the eco village or eco square. Another important criteria or another important feature of an eco square is diversity, cultural diversity. An eco village or an eco square should encourage cultural diversity, social diversity, and it should be a healthy and a safe space. Also, thermal comfort is one of the very important aspects of an eco square or an eco location. or eco community. Thermal comfort. That's why in designing eco villages and eco square, it's important to incorporate vegetation, incorporate trees, and incorporate shading elements that facilitate thermal comfort, wind comfort, and sun comfort. People should be encouraged to spend more time in the space. Okay, the first case study that will be comparing the Taksim Square is the KARTAL CEVIZ Square. This KARTAL CEVIZ Square, it was actually designed by my professor. The KARTAL Square, previously used as a stadium, was used for 14 years as a commercial area. The total construction area is 2,671 meters square. Sorry, 26,711 meters square, with a closed area of 2,776 and an open areas of 2,750 meters square. A space for sustainable, and it's actually a space for sustainable and versatile use with multifunctional activities area such as semi-Olympic swimming pools, multi-purpose halls, exhibition and foyer areas, library, cafeteria, infirmary, children playground, and etc. They are designed in this space. This space is designed to promote, encourage, and accommodate diversity. There are multifunctional activities. There is a mixture of green areas with hard surfaces, but a majority of green areas is a perfect example of an eco square. And another feature of this square is that it uses solar energy, that's renewable energy sources. So this is the very first example of an eco square. It's a perfect example of an eco square. Also, we prepared a SWOT analysis for the KARTAL CEVIZ square, and among the strengths, the square is planned at a central point and it has multifunctional activities, as I stated earlier, and part of the energy required for the area of for sustainability is being applied from solar panels, and the green areas is planned in various covers of the square. The square is designed on different levels, which promotes diversity. Then among the weaknesses, the buildings in the area are not designed as green buildings, and they are not designed, and the landscape is not designed according to edible landscape criteria. The part of the energy sources in the square is gotten from renewable energy sources, but not completely from renewable energy sources. Among the opportunities, the spaces are created at different levels and their usage areas are expanded. The fact that the square was planned at a central point allows users to meet many needs by consuming less energy, and by using water elements in different ways, the field dynamics has been increased. A significant threat to this location is that it's a general threat for Istanbul. Earthquake threats in underground and above ground structure spaces of the square, and another threat is the hard ground areas of the square are more than the green areas. These are pictures that shows the plan of the square. The square is not just designed, it's not just an open space square, it's actually buildings that are incorporated into the design of the square. These are it's a cultural building, public building. The second case study is the Isfahan Historic Square in Iran, and this is like one of the most perfect examples of an eco square. Just from the picture, you can see that it has a good amount or a good percentage of vegetation cover. It has biodiversity. You can see the water elements, you can see the walk paths, you can see the vegetation, and also more importantly, vehicular access is not allowed on the site. It's a very good example of an eco square. The Isfahan Historic Square is 160 meters wide and 560 meters long, constructed between 1958 and 1598 and 1629. Neighboring the square are the Shaman Mosque, which is a very iconic mosque on the south side of the square, the Ali Kabu Palace in the west, the Sheikh Love Allah Mosque on the east, and the Kayseri Gate, which opens into the Isfahan Grand Bazaar on the north. Designed as a space depicting centralized power by making Isfahan the grand capital of Persia, the power of the clergy represented by the Shah Mosque on the south, the power of the merchants represented by the Imperial Bazaar on the north, and the power of the Shah himself residing in the Ali Kapi Mosque on the west. And another important feature of this square is that it's enlisted as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This square has many important features. It has a very rich history. The buildings surrounding the site are significant buildings. They all hold significance, and the site is it's a very popular tourist attraction and a very good example of an eco square. It has all the criteria, all the features that an eco square should possess, apart from renewable energy sources. The major strength of this square is that it's designed as a central point. There are many important activities surrounding the square, and which makes the square very functional. It's not an idle square. Among the weaknesses of the square is lack of sewage and drainage network within the square, and it's not designed according to edible landscape criteria. Opportunities, the presence of more green areas and soft spaces in the square design. Among the threats, increase in tourist vegetation and activities in and around the site can lead to noise pollution and depletion. Economic development, which which gives rise to pressure and allows the construction of multi-story commercial and parking buildings in the historic center within the buffer zone. Road widening schemes which threaten the boundaries of the site. Because the site is a location where a lot of people visit, there are actually some schemes to widen the roads which might threaten the vegetation and the state of the Isfahan Square. These are pictures that shows us the aerial view of the Isfahan Square and the vegetation in and around the site. The third case study is the Sultan Ahmet Square in Istanbul. This is also a very successful example of an eco square. We can see the vegetation around the square. We can see the type of trees there that provide shading. We can see water elements there. It's a complete and perfect description of the eco square. It was formerly known as a hippodrome. The hippodrome, which is habitually associated with Constantinople's days of magnificence as an imperial capital. However, it predates that era. The surviving monuments in the middle barrier of the racecourse, the two obelisks and the serpentine column now sit in holes in a landscaped garden. The hippodrome was the center of the city's social life and still maintains that objective after centuries in the form of a square. The presence of historic monuments, namely the statues of Porphyrius, walled obelisk of Thutmose III, and the Serpentine column enriches the cultural and historic heritage of the square. This square is a square that is rich in culture. It was formerly used during the days of Constantinople. It was formerly used as a race course. Then the SWOT analysis for the square, that's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The square is designed as a central point. Surrounding buildings and activities makes the square actively functional, and also it is listed as a UNESCO heritage site. Among its weaknesses, it has a larger percentage of concrete cover and is not designed according to edible landscape criteria, and the required energy is not obtained from renewable energy sources. Among the opportunities, the presence of more green areas and soft spaces in the square design. The presence of seating areas encourages prolonged stay and use of the space, unlike that of the Taksim Square. And diverse activities surrounding square promotes diverse social interactions. The square doesn't just have only religious activities, it has various forms of activities, and it promotes social interaction, promotes diversity, which is an important criteria for eco squares. Among the threats, the increase in tourist visitation and activities in and around the square can lead to noise pollution and depletion. An increase in automobile activities can increase the risk of air and noise pollution and reduce pedestrian safety for disabled users. These are pictures showing the square, both from the aerial view and a walk path in the square. The fourth case study is the People's Square in Shanghai. It is actually a very unique square. It's one of the largest squares in the example. From the picture, you can see the landscape, you can see the water elements, you can see the buildings in and around the site. It's one of the most perfect examples, or it's a very perfect example of an eco square designed with diverse kinds of vegetation. It's not just a single type of vegetation available on the site. Previously known as the number one race course Far East, but was later destroyed. In 1949, the People's Avenue was constructed across the center of the area, with the People's Park built on the north side and the People's Square on the south portion. By the end of 1993, through a wide-ranging construction, it covered an area of about 140,000 square meters and became the largest public square in the city. Towards the northwest corner of is the Shanghai Grand Theatre, with a colossal structure made virtually out of glass, with which is balanced by an urban planning exhibition hall in the east, and in the northeast side lies the subway station, along which the south side of the People's Avenue. There are a number of large underground structures. In and around this square, there are many activities. It even has a subway station, which makes the square a very active location. Then the SWOT analysis for the Shanghai People's Square is that, also as other eco squares that I've cited as examples, the square is designed as a central point, and the surrounding activities makes it a very active square. An active, adequate green cover promoting balanced biodiversity. Among its weaknesses, it's not designed according to the arable landscape criteria, and the required energy is not obtained from renewable energy sources. Among its opportunities, the design work paths decreases environmental impact by automobiles. There's restricted access to automobiles, reducing air and noise pollution. Availability of seating and shading devices promotes prolonged use of the space, and availability of vegetation and water elements promotes biodiversity. Among its strengths, increase in tourist visitation and activities in and around the site can lead to noise pollution and degradation of the space. We can see the view of the site from the aerial view, and also from this idea. It's a very colorful square with different types of vegetation, different colors, and it's a very active region also. Now, looking at all the squares we've seen, we've looked at perfect examples of eco squares and eco parks, as some people would call it also. Now, from these locations and the criteria we've been able to gather, we made a comparison matrix comparing Taksim Square with all the other analyzed squares. That's the Sultan Ahmed Square, the Shanghai People's Square, the Isfahan Square, and the KARTAL CEVIZ Square. Looking at the comparison matrix, we see the criteria on the x-axis and the y-axis. We see the energy efficiency criteria for each of them, the renewable energy sources, water management, waste management, biodiversity, mobile transportation, land use, and air pollution prevention. We see different strategies that are being taken, or the differences between each of these squares. For instance, for renewable energy sources, only the KARTAL CEVIZ Square has renewable energy sources. And for energy efficiency, because they are public spaces and most of them don't have buildings apart from the KARTAL CEVIZ Square, so there is a minimum energy use for lighting, which is the main use of energy in these spaces, apart from the KARTAL CEVIZ Square, which has infrastructure and buildings in it, and it has moderate energy use for infrastructure. We see mobility and transportation. For the KARTAL CEVIZ Square, it is strictly pedestrian mobility. For the Isfahan Square, it's pedestrian mobility. For the Sultan Ahmed Square, is mixed. There is pedestrian mobility and automobiles, but the rate of automobile usage on the space is at its minimal. For the Shanghai People's Square, it is completely pedestrian and mobility, pedestrian accessibility and mobility. Meanwhile, for the Taksim Square, there is I won't call it high amount, but there is an average automobile activity on the space. We see also the land use. For the KARTAL CEVIZ Square, there is moderate infrastructure, vegetation, and paved surfaces. Meanwhile, for the Isfahan Square, there's landscape vegetation and paved surfaces. Then for the Taksim Square, there is almost complete concrete cover with minimal vegetation. So we can see that from the comparison matrix, we see that the square that has the least compliance, or the least in relation to an eco square, is the Taksim Square. And also look at the air pollution prevention on the square. The use of a high amount of vegetation reduces air pollution on site, which which we can see it has is positive in the KARTAL, Isfahan, Sultan Ahmet, and Shanghai People Square, unlike that of the Taksim Square, which has little amount of vegetation and high amount of air pollution because of the use of automobiles on site. And the next slide is of the continuation of the comparison matrix. On this slide, we can see the noise prevention, the environmental management system, the bodies and organizations um, that actually take care and manage each of these squares. For the Katal, for the Katal Jevi Square is managed by the municipality. For the Isfahan and the Sultan Ahmed Square, they are both managed by UNESCO. The Shanghai Square is managed by the People's Government of China, and the Taksim Square is provided by the Beyoğlu municipality. We can see the thermal comfort in each of the squares. We can see for the Kartal Ceviz Square, availability of shading promotes thermal comfort. For the Kartal, Isfahan, Sultan Ahmed, and the Shanghai People Square, there is a good amount of vegetation which at least can provide shading to a certain extent, unlike the Taksim Square, which has very minimal vegetation and doesn't encourage people to stay, because when the weather is very hot, people cannot stand there for long because of the minimal amount of vegetation and shading elements. We can also see the wind comfort for the first four squares, which are the main examples of eco squares that we used in this comparison matrix. They have a good amount of vegetation which serve as windbreakers and a wind comfort in the site, unlike that of the Taksim Square. And we also see the sun comfort in each of the squares. There is more shade in the first four squares than that of the Taksim Square. So this, from the comparison matrix, we see that the least square on the eco criteria is the Taksim Square. That's why at the end of the presentation, we propose strategies, eco strategies that can be implemented to make Taksim Square a more ecological square. And also these are the pictures showing the difference in each square. From this, you can see that they all look like eco squares, apart from the last one, which is more of concrete cover and minimal vegetation. Okay, now the model of eco criteria and implementation strategies for Taksim. The very first is energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. The strategies that are proposed is the use of solar powered lamps for lighting purposes, and the orientation and zoning of shading devices and landscape for encouraging air movement and solar gain. Then under water and waste management, the increase in green space to reduce rainwater runoff. That's all these strategies are proposed or are suggested for Taksim Square. Increasing in green spaces will reduce rainwater runoff, and the provision of storage for rainwater can be used for watering the landscape, and the provision of proper waste disposal and recycling on the next next criteria and strategies is biodiversity, land use, and mobility. The incorporation of diverse plant species into the landscape will help promote biodiversity. The incorporation of artificial pools or ponds into the landscape design to accommodate marine life such as ducks and other marine lives that are associated with public parks and pools. The design of pedestrian walk paths to discourage and restrict automobile access and activities will not only promote the positive land use and biodiversity, but to also help in preventing air pollution on airplane and noise pollution prevention. Air, air and noise pollution prevention. The increase in green landscape to absorb more carbon dioxide and restrict automobile activities on site by design. That means they're proposing a new design that will involve walk paths around the square instead of just a broad way that automobile activities can function. The next set of criteria are cultural, social health, and safety. The incorporation of seating areas and elements into design to encourage longer stays and prolonged use of space, also for social interactions. Introducing plant species and materials which will be used in landscape design, And also these materials and land and plant species should be safe to touch and safe to smell. And also, if possible, incorporation of edible landscape edible plants into the landscape. And also the design of landscape and materials on site should also incorporate universal design for disabled users. Thermal wind and sun comfort. Design and use of shading devices for thermal comfort, the incorporation of medium height trees to serve as windbreakers for wind comfort and renew the air quality in the space. Orientation of trees and standing elements should allow solar gain for cold winter months and thermal comfort. The including incorporating trees into this space doesn't mean that all the trees and plants should completely block the solar gain. For winter months, they should be oriented in a way that there can still be maximum solar gain in this. Now, looking at all the information that have been incorporated into this presentation, now we understand eco squares, eco urban spaces, eco public spaces, the criteria that ensure a perfect or a very good ecological square. So in conclusion, and also we also saw the criterias or the proposals or strategies that can be implemented in Taksim Square to make it a more ecological square. So in conclusion, sustainable and ecological urban squares increase the quality of life, which brings economic development, physical improvement, and social health and well-being. To reach ecological development in urban public spaces, as regards this study, not only theories of what qualities are needed to make a public open space more ecological and to sustain and increase their quality are essential, but also the importance of previously discussed strategies of turning the theories into practice should not be neglected. To sum up, in order to achieve successful urban squares with ecological benefits, adequate and appropriate monetary, human, and technical capacity for execution management, monitoring, and increased public awareness are mandatory. So basically that's all for this presentation. There's a lot involved in designing and making um, spaces more eco-friendly or more ecologically inclined. And making spaces more ecologically inclined is not just the job of urban designers and architects, it's the job of everybody. Everyone is involved at one level or the other. So it's important for the environment, it's important for the planet, it's important even for the health and well-being of the humans, which are the main users of spaces, public spaces, private spaces. So I hope you learned a lot from this presentation. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. And thank you very much for watching also.